Power needs more than belief, it needs infrastructure. And the Damnation Family had it. By 1852, their network extended beyond East Texas, into Arkansas, Louisiana, even parts of Indian Territory. Redemption camps popped up like plague boils, appearing overnight, vanishing before dawn, leaving behind only ashes and silence. But what most never knew is that the brothers weren't working alone. They had partners, merchants, bankers, local lawmen, even a few circuit judges, all complicit, all compromised, all on the payroll. You see, pain wasn't just a tool, it was leverage. Once a penitent revealed his secrets, his crimes, his debts, his hidden wealth, the brothers would send letters, not just to family, to creditors, enemies, rivals. We know what he did, but we can keep it quiet, for a tithe. Those who paid became clients, those who refused became examples. Imagine the reach. A corrupt sheriff sends his wayward son to be cleansed, only to receive a threatening letter from Cornelius with every sordid detail of the family's affairs. He pays, of course, not just once, regularly, in gold, in favors, in silence. That's how the brothers moved with impunity. Because the camps didn't need fences when fear did the job better, and they didn't need to bribe the frontier's lawmen when the lawmen were already kneeling in the pews, praying the ledger wouldn't expose them next. It's said that in 1854, the Damnation brothers held a private gathering outside Nacogdoches, not a revival, a summit. Attendees included 4 plantation heirs, 2 military officers, a federal land surveyor, and the editor of a regional newspaper. The purpose? Coordination. One former associate, who would later confess under federal pressure, said the family was planning a decentralized purification network across the American frontier, portable camps, mobile doctrine, ritualized confession exoen, traction that could be franchised under the banner of frontier revivalism. A spiritual cartel. But it wasn't just about souls anymore. It was about control, of people, of land, of information. The camps were cover for trafficking, not just of goods or secrets, but of minds. And every time a man begged for salvation in those woods, he became another node in the network, another asset, another opportunity. The church bells kept ringing, but the sermons were now written in the language of leverage. This was no longer a cult. This was a shadow government. And its currency was confession. They called it the trial of fire. But it wasn't about purification, it was about ownership. No man walked into that ritual and came out the same, not because he was cleansed, but because he was broken. And that was the point. They'd starve you first. 7 days, sometimes more, just water, if that. Then came the grave. Dig it with your hands, kneel in it, imagine yourself dead. Because that's what you were to them, a dying identity, ready to be remade. They'd surround you with song, hymns echoing through the pines, sweet, familiar voices, like church, like home, until the lash came. One man described it years later, though only once, and only while drunk, as hell wrapped in holiness. The whip wasn't leather, it was braided hide with broken nails, glass, wire. Each strike carried a verse. With each cry, Brother Malachi would shout, "The flesh dies, the spirit soars." And all around you, other penitents would watch. Some cried, some prayed, but most watched with dead eyes. Because by that point, they had already been through it. And once you passed that threshold, you were never a threat again. You were compliant. Not because they beat you, but because they rewired you. That's what the trial of fire was. Ritualized trauma used to sever a man from his former self. Modern psychology calls it identity disintegration. Cults call it rebirth. Intelligence agencies call it programming. The Damnation brothers called it deliverance. They understood what few even dare whisper, that the most obedient servants aren't the ones who follow orders. They're the ones who believe they were the ones giving them. Because after the trial of fire, they didn't need to force you to stay. You chose to. You thought you were free, redeemed, called by God. But you were just broken in the exact way they needed. Jebediah, He was the artist of it all. His hands didn't just inflict pain. They measured it, calibrated it. He knew just how far to push without breaking the body, only the will. He turned trauma into devotion, and in that pit, beneath the stars and the smoke, he didn't baptize you. He branded you. Ask yourself, how does a man forget his own name? It starts in silence. After the trial of fire, penitents weren't permitted to speak for 72 hours. Not a word, not a prayer, no eye contact, no names, just silence. They called it the watching. Each penitent was placed in a crude wooden cell, barely large enough to sit, and forced to face a mirror. But not a real mirror. A polished shard of iron, dark and warped, the kind that distorts your reflection until you're no longer sure if it's your face staring back or something else. They were told to reflect, to contemplate the void within. But what they were really doing was forgetting. This wasn't meditation. It was erasure. Malachi had studied something most preachers would call blasphemy. Ancient mystic techniques recovered from desert sects and heretic monasteries. He understood that if you control what a man sees, hears, and speaks, you rewrite his identity, and if you strip that identity away completely, you own whatever's left. On the third day, Cornelius would enter, ledger in hand, and one by one he'd ask, "Who are you?" The right answer was not your name. The right answer was, "Redeemed." Say anything else, and Jebediah stepped in. Because in their gospel, there was no room for hesitation. Either you were purified or you were resisting, and resistance required correction. Some broke within hours, others took days, but all of them eventually gave the same answer. Redeemed. It was more than a word. It was a contract. From that point forward, you no longer existed. Your debts, your past, your thoughts, they were no longer yours. You belonged to the order of purification. You were a vessel, a tool. And here's the sick genius. Many of them embraced it. Because being nothing is easier than being broken. The world outside had abandoned them. Their sins had ruined them. But here, in the silence, in the fire, in the darkness, they were reborn into something useful. They weren't dead. They were deployed. And what came next was mission work. Not the kind you read about in church pamphlets, the kind that moves through towns like fog, the kind that leaves no footprints, just whispers. The world believed the redeemed had become missionaries. It was a convenient lie. The families back home clung to it. The churches printed letters full of vague, holy euphemisms. The newspapers called them frontier saints. But the truth, the raw, undressed truth, was that the Damnation Family had created something far more useful than evangelists. They had created operatives. After the trial of fire and the watching, the redeemed were sent out, not to preach, not to save, to collect money, information, leverage. Each redeemed was armed with two things, a forged letter of blessing from a southern congregation and a deep trauma bond to the Damnation Brothers. That bond was stronger than blood, stronger than truth. These weren't men anymore. They were instruments. They would arrive in a new town with nothing but a cross and a story. "The Lord has called me," they'd say, "to plant a mission here, to bring light into the wilderness." The local pastors welcomed them. Townspeople fed them. Lawmen gave them space. But behind closed doors, the redeemed were writing letters, gathering confessions, listening to gossip, identifying the vulnerable, and always sending that information back to Cornelius. It was the perfect operation. No one suspects the preacher. No one doubts the penitent. No one stops a man with a Bible. And because the redeemed believed their pain had made them holy, they saw no evil in what they did. Spying, lying, manipulating, it was God's work. The people they betrayed, sinners resisting salvation, the property they helped steal, tithes for the kingdom. You have to understand, these weren't willing criminals, they were programmed believers. Every act of betrayal was to them a sacrament, and if any of them began to wake up, if any fragment of their old self tried to break through the conditioning, they were summoned home, back to the camps, back to Jebediah, Because no man leaves the system whole. If the programming cracks, the body is buried, and a new cross is added. One of the few who escaped would later write in code, "The fire does not end in the pit. It travels, it spreads, it wears robes and rings, it speaks softly, and it calls itself mercy." They say all tyrants fall, but the most dangerous ones don't fall because they're weak. They fall because they believe they're gods. By 1860, the Damnation Family had become more than infamous. They were mythic. Their names whispered across state lines like a traveling plague. Entire families disappeared into their camps. Wealth was transferred. Estates quietly collapsed. Land changed hands without signatures. And yet, no lawman could catch them. Why? Because there was no crime. If the victims didn't know they were victims. But perfection breeds arrogance, and Malachi, the so-called preacher, began to crave more than obedience. He wanted legacy. He started keeping relics, objects from the redeemed, shoes, locks of hair, even bones. At first, he claimed it was for remembrance, but soon he declared them sacred. He built a reliquary deep in the pine forest, behind a false chapel, hidden beneath the altar, behind stones carved with scripture in Latin, Hebrew, and something no one could identify. It was there that cracks began to form. One of the redeemed, a man named Elias Vane, returned to the reliquary alone one night. Some say it was a crisis of faith. Others claim he was following a vision. Whatever the reason, he found something. Buried beneath the altar were not just relics. They were artifacts. Dozens of leather-bound ledgers, written in Malachi's hand, each page recording not scripture but statistics, sins catalogued, beatings administered, assets recovered, kill counts. Elias stole one. He fled the camp and reached a town called Rusk. Disheveled, starving, bleeding from his wrists, he gave the ledger to a blacksmith named Harold Kane before collapsing in the street. The ledger was unlike anything Kane, or the town's preacher, had ever seen. It read like a ledger of conquest. Unit number 43, confessed adultery, theft, patricide. Assets recovered, 43D. 6. Land transferred, 18 acres. Redemption status, denied. Disposal, ascension burial. Each entry ended the same way. Final ledger entry, claimed by glory. The townspeople were stunned. A few wanted to turn it in, but Harold Kane didn't. He made copies, dozens, sent them to Austin, to DC, to New Orleans, to anyone who might believe. It was the beginning of the end, not because the law cared, but because someone much higher up had something to lose. And once power is threatened, it does not investigate. It exterminates.